The mansion stood like a monument to forgotten dreams, its 40 rooms echoing with the hollow footsteps of a man who had everything except the one thing money could never buy. Harrison Whitmore, at 78 years old, was worth $3.7 billion. Yet he ate his meals alone at a table built for 20, spoke to no one but his lawyers, and hadn't celebrated a birthday in 34 years. The servants who came and went never lasted more than a few months, driven away not by cruelty, but by something far more unsettling: the suffocating silence of a soul that had given up on human connection. But on a rain-soaked Tuesday in November, everything changed when a young woman appeared at his gate, clutching a worn leather journal and a photograph so old it had turned sepia with time. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment below about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And subscribe to our channel. Stories like these remind us that it's never too late for redemption, never too late for love to find its way back into the darkest corners of our lives. Harrison had built his empire from nothing, a poor boy from the coal mines of West Virginia, who clawed his way to the top of the real estate industry through sheer determination and a willingness to sacrifice everything. And sacrifice he did. His wife left him when their daughter was only 5, unable to compete with his obsession with success. His daughter, Emily, tried for years to maintain a relationship with him, but every missed recital, every forgotten birthday, every business trip that took precedence over her graduations slowly built a wall between them. The final blow came on her wedding day, when Harrison chose to close a deal in Singapore rather than walk her down the aisle. She told him that day, through tears and trembling rage, that he was dead to her, and she meant it. 20 years passed without a single word between them. 20 years during which Harrison convinced himself he didn't care, that his empire was enough. That solitude was simply the price of greatness. The only person who had remained constant in those decades was Miguel Santos, his gardener. Miguel had tended Harrison's extensive grounds for 32 years, arriving each morning at dawn with a quiet dignity that never demanded conversation, but somehow always offered comfort. Miguel would work the rose gardens, prune the ancient oaks, and maintain the koi pond with a gentle reverence that suggested he understood what Harrison had lost, even if Harrison himself refused to acknowledge it. They rarely spoke beyond practical matters, yet Miguel's presence became the only thread connecting Harrison to humanity. When Miguel died suddenly of a heart attack at 71, Harrison attended the funeral from a distance, standing beneath an umbrella at the edge of the cemetery, watching as Miguel's family, a family he realized he knew nothing about, grieved together in a display of love so profound it physically hurt him to witness. He left before the burial, telling himself he had done his duty, that his presence would have been inappropriate anyway, that he had no right to intrude on their grief. 3 months later, the girl appeared at his gate. Her name was Sofia Santos, Miguel's granddaughter, and she was 26 years old with her grandfather's gentle eyes and something else, a determination that reminded Harrison uncomfortably of himself at that age. Through the intercom, her voice was steady despite the rain that soaked through her thin jacket. She explained that her grandfather had left her a journal filled with observations about Harrison written over 3 decades, and that Miguel had made her promise to deliver it personally. Harrison's first instinct was to refuse, to send her away like he had sent away everyone else who attempted to penetrate his self-imposed exile. But something in her voice, or perhaps it was the mention of Miguel, made him hesitate long enough for curiosity to override his defenses. He buzzed her through the gates, watching on the security monitors as she walked the long driveway to his front door, her figure small and resolute against the backdrop of his ostentatious wealth. She handed him the journal without ceremony, and as Harrison opened it, he discovered that Miguel had been documenting not the gardens but him. Page after page contained observations written in Miguel's careful handwriting, notes about the days Harrison looked particularly tired, the times he stood at his daughter's old bedroom window for hours, the Christmas Eves when Miguel found him sitting alone in the dark library, surrounded by unopened bottles of expensive scotch. Miguel had written about the roses Harrison thought no one noticed him cutting on what would have been his wedding anniversary, the ones he left at the estate's small chapel before dawn. He had documented Harrison's ritual of playing his daughter's favorite childhood songs on the piano late at night, when he thought no one could hear. And most devastatingly, Miguel had written with compassion and understanding, never judgment, about a man who had imprisoned himself in success and couldn't find the key to escape. The final entry, dated just days before Miguel's death, contained instructions for Sofia. Miguel had written that he believed Harrison was finally ready, that 3 decades of silent observation had shown him a man who had punished himself long enough, a man who needed someone to show him that redemption was still possible. He asked Sofia to do what he had been too respectful to do himself, to force Harrison to confront his loneliness, to help him reach out to his daughter before it was too late, to remind him that wealth without love was just another form of poverty. Harrison read these words while Sofia stood silently in his foyer, rain dripping from her clothes onto his marble floors, and for the first time in 34 years, tears rolled down his face unchecked. What happened next unfolded slowly, like spring arriving after an endless winter. Sofia didn't leave that day or the next or the one after that. She simply stayed, initially sleeping in one of the servants' quarters, gradually filling the silent mansion with a presence that was neither intrusive nor dismissive. She cooked meals in the industrial kitchen that had only ever produced food for one, simple dishes her grandfather had taught her, and insisted Harrison eat with her at the small breakfast table, rather than his enormous dining room. She talked about Miguel, sharing stories of a man Harrison realized he had known only superficially despite 3 decades of proximity. Miguel had been a father figure to Sofia after her own parents died in a car accident when she was 12. He had taught her about plants and patience, about showing up every day even when things were hard, about finding dignity in honest work. And he had talked about Harrison, not as a boss but as a puzzle he spent years trying to understand, a broken thing he wished he could help fix. Sofia found Emily's contact information despite Harrison's protests, and she wrote her a letter explaining everything, about Miguel's journal, about her grandfather's final wish, about Harrison's decades of silent suffering that pride had prevented him from expressing. She didn't ask Emily to forgive her father, didn't make excuses for his failures, but simply offered a bridge if Emily was ready to cross it. For 3 agonizing weeks there was no response, and Harrison convinced himself it was what he deserved, that some sins were too great for redemption. But then Emily called, and her voice on the phone, older now but unmistakably his daughter's, shattered the last of his defenses. She was willing to meet for coffee, nothing more. No promises beyond a single conversation. She had her own wounds to heal, her own anger to process. But Miguel's journal had revealed a dimension to her father's suffering she had never considered. She agreed to try. The coffee meeting led to another, then a careful dinner, then a tentative invitation to meet her 2 teenage children, Harrison's grandchildren he had never known existed. The process was painful, filled with necessary confrontations about the past, tears from decades of accumulated hurt, apologies that could never fully erase what had been lost but created space for something new to grow. Sofia remained throughout, a quiet catalyst who had sparked this transformation simply by honoring her grandfather's dying wish. She helped Harrison learn how to express emotions he had buried for decades, how to listen without defensiveness, how to be present rather than distant. She showed him that wealth meant nothing if you had no one to share your life with, that success without relationships was the ultimate failure. On the anniversary of Miguel's death, Harrison stood in the garden with Sofia and Emily and his grandchildren, dedicating a memorial bench overlooking the rose garden Miguel had loved. Carved into the wood were words Harrison had chosen. Some people enter our lives quietly but change everything. Miguel Santos, gardener, friend, and the man who saved a soul by simply showing up. Harrison held his daughter's hand, tentative at first, then firmly, while his grandchildren played among the roses. Sofia stood beside the bench her grandfather would never see, and Harrison finally understood what Miguel had spent 30 years trying to teach him through silent example. That it was never too late to choose differently, never too late to let love in, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. The mansion no longer echoed with loneliness but rang with the sound of family, of laughter, of a life finally lived rather than merely endured. And Harrison, who had once believed himself beyond redemption, discovered that sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures, but from the quiet persistence of those who refuse to let us give up on ourselves.